Hey guys, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I appreciate you tuning in. And as always, I want to welcome y'all and thank you for any input that you may have in all the videos I give. I'd appreciate if you leave any genuine comments below, questions or anything like that, and I'll try to get to them. No promises, no guarantees, because I mean, sometimes you have a lot of things that may pop up and they get you distracted. So I'll try to get around to them as best as I can. But today I wanted to continue talking about uh, a particular concern, or I say particular concern, but a doctrine of the Hebrew Israelites. As I've been, if you look at my previous videos, you'll see I've been doing a series on them, which eventually I'll come to an end on the Hebrew Israelites, and I'll move on to just other topics in general and other series as well. What I wanted to look at here was a passage they use that you hear them frequently quote when they're on the street side or in their videos or wherever. And it's from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 7. In this chapter here, there is a passage that is often quoted that is used in an effort to establish the doctrine that today, currently, the nation of Israel, the physical lineage, the earthly ethnic lineage of Jacob, are a special people to God. And because of that, they are superior to other ethnicities, other peoples of the world. That there is a superior trait that belongs to them. Matter of fact, I've heard it said before from them that they and not all of them may say this, but I know of some that have said that Israel is superior genetically. I've heard they're genetically superior. They said they're emotionally superior, intellectually superior to other nations. They are just better, inherently better than other people in the world. And so they'll go to Deuteronomy chapter 7. I wanted to point out this passage here today. And this lesson can really be addressing the whole topic of the role of Israel in general. This is nothing that's specific to the Hebrew Israelites. They have just taken a passage concerning the Old Testament, concerning a passage that does relate to Israel in the Old Covenant, but they have applied it to themselves and applied it to today, and they believe that this passage teaches their superiority amongst other nations, other ethnicities in the world today, or even back then, as far as the superiority factor. We'll address that here. But it's in Deuteronomy 7. And just to kind of give you a quick run over, remember, we're 40 years out of being exile or being the Exodus. We're coming to the land of Moab, or they're in the land of Moab here, Deuteronomy 7. They are about to enter into the promised land. The old generation has died away, those who came out of Egypt, except for Joshua and Caleb. Moses is now basically telling this new generation. Remember, the first generation that left Israel in the Exodus died in the wilderness. That was part of their punishment for all their complaining and their doubting and their faithlessness toward God. And so, as many days as they were spying out the land, when they were sent to spy out the land, as many days as they were in the land is how many days that they would be spending in the wilderness, or many years rather, they would be spending in the wilderness, 40 years. And so that old generation had died off. The new generation is coming in now. Moses is basically telling this next generation the law that was given to their parents back at Sinai. And so Deuteronomy actually means second law, and it doesn't mean like a second in addition to the first law that was given at Sinai. Think of it more or less as a second recitation. He's telling the law to these folks here. As he told it to their parents, he's telling them as well, reminding them, here's what God expects of you. And specifically in Deuteronomy chapter 28, he tells them, if you go into the land, here's what's going to happen if you keep God's covenant. Everything's going to go good for you. Everything's going to go well. If you are faithless toward God, if you break his covenant, if you disobey God and do not keep his statutes and commandments, God will what? He'll punish you. He'll kick you out of the land. It's going to be a hard time. And so this is basically Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26, which was the Deuteronomy 28 equivalent for this generation's parents. Leviticus 26 was addressing those who came out of Egypt. Deuteronomy 28 is addressing their children, but both chapters are basically the same thing. If you keep God's covenant, everything will go well. If you break God's covenant, bad times are coming. Pretty much. That's a cut and dry way to look at it. And so in chapter 7 of Deuteronomy, here's Moses speaking to these people. And he says in verse 1, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites. Well, you know what? I'm going to stop right here because this is actually one I want to get to. Let me just come down here to verse 6. Because here's the passage, here's the particular reference the Hebrew Israelites will mention commonly, regularly. And here it is right here in chapter 7, verse 6. It says, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. And after quoting that, they will say something along the lines of, see, we are above everybody else. We're better than other nations. We are superior to other people. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6. I believe Deuteronomy 14, 1 or 2 says the same thing. And it's God basically saying that he chose Israel. He chose them to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. Again, I'm using the New King James Version here, as you can see. Excuse me. So what does this passage teach? Does Deuteronomy 7 and verse 6, is Moses telling Israel, hey, y'all are better than all these other, the nations that you're going to go get out of the land, the Canaanites, all these other peoples, Elam, which Edom, of course, y'all are better people than them. Y'all are superior to them. And therefore, God chose you. He chose you above all the rest of the people of the earth because of some superiority amongst yourselves. Is that what this passage teaches? Well, let me tell you at the very outset a resounding no. This teaches no such thing. And I will just say right now, if you are familiar with the Old Covenant, the Old Testament, you'll realize that Israel was every bit of a rebellious nation as all the Gentile nations that surrounded them. They made themselves no different than all the rest. The only thing that made them different from everybody else was that they had a special covenant with God and that they were the seed through whom God was going to bring the Christ. They were the genetic lineage that God was going to bring forth, the promised seed, let me put it like that, which ultimately terminated in Jesus himself. That's Galatians 3 and verse 16. Jesus was the promised seed, not the nation of Israel. And that's something that will have to be addressed because I know the Hebrew Israelites will disagree with that. They will disagree on what the promise was referring to. But Deuteronomy 7 and verse 6, Moses does tell them they are a holy people, holy to the Lord their God. The Lord chose them to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. So let's back up to chapter 7 and verse 1. And we'll start here and we'll start seeing how Moses talks to this nation of people who are about to come into the land that God had promised to their father, Abraham, or fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Deuteronomy 7:1, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess and has cast out many nations before you, here's the nations they're going to cast out: the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. Now stop right there. 7 nations what? Greater and mightier than you. So if the Israelites were such a superior nation on a physical level, if they were genetically superior, like their biology was superior, notice what this text starts off with. The very nations they are going into the land to drive out are what? Greater and mightier than they are. And so right off the top, Moses is telling us, and he's telling them back at this time, these folks here that you're going to get, you're not going to go in there and just stomp them out by your own might, and you're not going to just go in there and outnumber them and outpower them. No, they're greater than you. They're mightier than you. You're going to need some help. And so it says, notice in the very next verse, verse 2, we're going to see the help they're going to get. Notice, and when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. So wait a minute. Were these Israelites going to go in the land and just outmuscle and outnumber the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites? No. It says right here that God would deliver those nations over to Israel for them to conquer and utterly destroy. Basically, God is going to say, you can't handle these folks on your own. I'll take care of the parts of I'll take care of the fact that you can't handle them, and I'll present them to you in a manner to which you can handle them, thanks to me. I'm giving you this land. That's the whole point. God is giving them this land. They're not going in there on their own strength and might and taking this land away from people. That's not the point. God is basically emphasizing to them, these are greater and mightier folks than you, and I'm going to deliver them over to you. That way you can conquer and destroy them. Look what it says. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them. Now watch. Let's keep going. Verse 3, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter for your son. Why? For, here's why, they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. Verse 5, but thus you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars and break down their sacred pillars and cut down their wooden images and burn their carved images with fire. So get rid of them, get rid of all their idolatry, destroy it all. Don't let a remnant of it remain. And here's why he wants to do that. Here's why God wants them to destroy everything. Look, verse 6, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. So the word for here is basing it, he's going back and telling them why he wants them to do all these things, why he doesn't want them to make marriages, why he doesn't want them to leave anything remaining. For you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. So he's saying, you are a holy people. Was God saying that I want you to destroy these people, get them out of the land, and get rid of all their idolatry, any relics that remain that would relate to their idolatry or their Gentile or their pagan ways? Is he saying get rid of all that because y'all are holy in the sense of y'all are righteous people and you guys are faithful followers of God, unlike these people over here, and therefore I want you to stay away? No, that's not what he's saying. The word holy does not necessarily imply righteous living. The word holy means to set apart. It's a sanctification. It could be for any reason, set apart. That's the idea here, is that they are a holy people to the Lord their God. Well, in what way are they holy? And we're going to see some passages in just a minute here that show that they were not holy in their character. They were not holy as a nation as far as righteous living. So then how would this mean they are holy? Here's why. They were holy, that is, they were set apart. They were chosen by God. They were sanctified, set apart, because God what? Chose them to be the ones through whom he would bring forth his Messiah. When God made his promise to Abraham, all the way back in Genesis 12, he told Abraham what? That in you and your seed, all the families of the earth, what? Shall be blessed. There was a promise there that God made to Abram and to his son Isaac in Genesis 26:4. And then he passed it on to Jacob in Genesis 28:14 and 15, and on down into the nation of Israel. And so what happens is God set them apart for a purpose. He chose Israel for a purpose. When he sanctified them, he made them holy. They were set aside for the reason of what? Bringing forth that promise to Abraham. God told Abraham that he would bless all the world through his seed. That seed, Acts 3:25 and 26, Galatians 3:16, conclusively demonstrates that the promised seed was Jesus. Jesus is the fulfillment of the promises to Israel. Jesus, the Messiah, and his kingdom, his spiritual kingdom, the church, that is the fulfillment of God's promises to Israel. They didn't realize that, and that's why they ended up killing Jesus. That's a whole other issue. But that's why God set Israel apart. God set apart Israel for the purpose of maintaining his promise to Abraham. That's why he chose them. Not because of something about them, it was because of something he promised to their father. That's why they are a what? A holy people. They are set aside, they are set apart, holy, for that reason. And so it says in verse 6 again, you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself. They were chosen. Why were they chosen? We just said that. because of what God promised to their fathers. He chose them what? A special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. Now, let's look at this really carefully. Is this verse saying that God chose Israel because they were above all the peoples of the earth? That does not say that in the language at all. Does it say that God chose them because of some inherent quality that he saw in them? Like, oh wow, I mean, I'm looking here's God looking at the earth, and he looks at all the different nations that are on the face of the earth, and he says, man, you know what? I'm just looking at these Israelites, and they are just a step above everybody else. I like them. I'm going to go with them. Is that why the text says? Absolutely not. The text doesn't say here that he chose them for that reason. Look what it says. It doesn't even say he chose them because they were above, or he chose them and made them above. The word above refers to the choosing action on God. God chose them above all the other people. Doesn't say God chose them because they were above all the people. Doesn't say he chose them and made them above. It says he chose them above. So what was above here? The word above is not a reference to Israel. The word above is a reference to the choosing. God chose Israel above all the peoples. What does that mean? Out of all the nations. That's what the word above. Matter of fact, if you look at, I think it's the New American Standard. I think the English Standard may have it as well. They don't say above, they say out of. And there are various other places in the Old Testament where that word is translated out of. And so he basically picked them above all the other people, or he picked them out of all the other people of the earth. And the reason why is right here. God tells us in verse 7, if we just kept reading, because this is the verse that they like to quote, and then just stop and give the commentary what they think this verse is saying. But God chose them. They're a holy people. He chose them above all the peoples on the face of the earth. Here's why God chose them. He tells us the negatives, why he didn't choose them. And then he tells us why he did choose them. First of all, look at some of the negatives. Verse 7. The Lord did not set his love on you, nor choose you, because what? You were more in number than any other people. So we know right away, Israel was never chosen by God because they were some great nation of magnitude, like they had this giant population, and God's like, wow, look at them. There are so many people compared to all these other nations. Nope, had nothing to do with the number, because he says he did not choose them because they were more in number than any other people. Matter of fact, God even adds to that and says, you were the least of all people. So they were actually a tiny nation. They were a small bunch. And if you think about it, I mean, they just came out of slavery 40 years ago. And so it makes sense that they weren't some giant nation. Matter of fact, if you look at Exodus 1, even though it didn't work, Pharaoh tried to destroy the males because he was worried about the size of them, to where they might be able to be a significant force should they ever side with Egypt's enemies. But God still here calls them a least of all peoples. So we know right away God didn't pick them. God tells us, I didn't pick them because they were large in number. Here's why he chose them. Verse 8. He chose them, God, but he says, but because the Lord loves you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers. That's what I said a few moments ago about the promise made to Abraham. God promised to Abraham. And God's saying, this is why I chose you, because I love you, and because he would keep the oath which he swore to your fathers. That's why what? The Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of bondage, from the hand of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So here we go. It's not like God looked upon them, and saw something about them and then chose them. No, but it says what? Because the Lord loves you. So God already loved them, and he already was going to keep the oath which he swore to your fathers. Therefore, because of those two things, he chose Israel. That's how it works. He chose them because of his love, because of the promise. Not that he saw something first in them and then chose. No, he came to them and chose them because of what God had already done to their fathers. You see? And so that's why we see here in Deuteronomy 7 the choosing. They are a holy people, and God chose them not because of their size. It was because he had because he loved them, and it was because what? Of the promise he made to their fathers. That's why he chose them. He says he did not set his love on you or choose you because you were more in number. So the love didn't come after something about them. The love was there first. The promise was there first, and therefore God chose Israel. So we know right here, there's nothing about Israel in this passage that shows. You want to keep on reading, go on down. Therefore, verse 9, therefore know that the Lord your God, he is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and mercy for 1,000 generations. What? With those who love him and keep his commandments. And he repays those who hate him to their face to destroy them. He will not be slack with him who hates him. He will repay him to his face. Therefore, you shall keep the commandment, the statutes, and the judgments which I command you today to observe them. And so I would encourage you to read the rest of the chapter here. There's a lot more that can be said. But here from Deuteronomy 7, we're going to go to Deuteronomy 9 here in just a moment. When you look here and you look at the passage that is quoted, if you look at the surrounding context, verse 1 all the way through verse 5, and then 7 down through 11, there is nothing to indicate that God chose Israel because of something about them. Actually, it was everything it had to do outside of Israel is what led God to choose them, not anything to do with who they were in particular. And so this totally wipes out the narrative that the Hebrew Israelites would have you to believe that, well, there's something special about Israel, or we are just great people, we're better than everybody else, and so God chose us, or that God even chose us and made us better. That's nowhere in the text either. Nothing at all. We see that they were small in number. The nations that were around them, or that they were going in the land to take at the time, were mightier than them, were greater in number than them. And God says, so it's not because of your might, it's not because of your size. It has everything to do with the fact that I had made a covenant with your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And therefore, on that basis, I loved you, I chose you. That's the idea of God loving them. His love for them in the context here refers to God choosing them over the others. It doesn't mean the idea of love here in the context is not God had like emotional goodwill toward Israel, and then he had all this hatred and ill will towards the rest of the nations. That's not anywhere found in this context. The idea of God loving them is a reference to God choosing them out of all the nations because of the promises. So let's look at another chapter real quick. You want to jump over to Deuteronomy 9, just 2 chapters away. And folks, there could be a whole lot more said about this. I just didn't want to make a giant, this video is already going to be relatively long. But I wanted to look at just the context and just 2 chapters over to see what we're talking about. So here is Deuteronomy 9, and we're still in the New King James Version. Here's Moses still talking to the nation, okay? Read what he says. Hear, O Israel, you are to cross over the Jordan today and go in to dispossess nations. There we go, just like Deuteronomy 7:1, greater and mightier than yourself. Cities great and fortified up to heaven. A people great and tall, the descendants of the Anakim, whom you know and of whom you heard it said, who can stand before the descendants of Anak? This is talking about the giants that were in the land. That's another topic that we can talk about at a different time. But in the Bible, you'll see about giants that were in the Nephilim were giants. You'll see that there were giants in the land at the time. Matter of fact, the original creation of people were actually larger, healthier. They were just basically all around superior to us today. And these folks were still around. That genetic line of superiority was fading away as time goes along. But in the context here, we see in Deuteronomy 9 that there are people in the land that were relatively larger, that had a reputation of being great and tall. And it was a reputation that was spoken of them that said, who can stand before these people? They must have been giant people, maybe great warriors in battle, and nobody could go toe to toe with them because they would just punish them and destroy them. If they tried to do something like that, those Anakim would just destroy these people. And so Moses tells them that when you go into the land, you're going to see these great giant cities, a people great and tall. So we see there once again, there's no physical superiority of Israel here. And these people are greater and mightier than they. And so Moses says in verse 3, therefore understand today that, since you can't take these people on, you guys can't go in there and just stand toe to toe and punish these folks. A little stutter there, sorry. My mind's ahead of my mouth there, so, or the other way around. Either way, therefore, understand today that the Lord your God is he who goes over before you as a consuming fire. In other words, once again, you can't handle these people on your own. I'm going in before you, little Israel, inferior in size to these people, Israel, to get them for you. He, that is God, he will destroy them and bring them down before you. So you shall drive them out and destroy them quickly. This is very exactly parallel to what we're reading in Deuteronomy 7, the first few verses there. And it says, as the Lord has said. So once again, God is telling them, you're going to go over here and you're going to take out these people, but it's only because I'm going in there first, before you. I'm going in before you. And I am going to basically set them up, cripple them, if you would, to where you can get them out by your power at that point. But you're not going to do it without me because you can't, because you're not superior in that regard. So again, we see an emphasis on not a physical superiority with Israel here. But look at verse 4. God goes into it even further to talk about why they are getting the land and why they aren't getting the land. Deuteronomy 9, verse 4. Do not think in your heart, after the Lord your God has cast them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness, the Lord has brought me in to possess the land. God's telling him, when you go into this land, and once everything is said and done and you're in the land, don't think for a moment that you're in there because y'all are good people. Okay? God says, here's the real story, but it is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Oh, so not only do we have God telling us it's not because of their numbers, their great size, they're not stronger, they can't go toe to toe with these people, they're huge in the land. But he says, not only that, but I'm not bringing you into this land because y'all may be smaller, y'all may be weaker and inferior, but y'all are really good people. Y'all behave so much better than all these other Gentiles, and you just deserve this land because you're so good. No, that's not at all the case. God says it's really because these nations are wicked and that it's time for them to receive their judgment, and I'm simply using you, Israel, as my tool. You recall in Isaiah 10, it says there about God using Assyria as his axe. It's his weapon to punish. Well, God was using Israel here as his tool to punish the nations. And so that's why they're being brought in, not because of them. Again, it's for external reasons. Nothing about Israel, but about things beyond them. Is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is driving them out before you. Verse 5, it is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land. So again, God telling them it's not because of any personal conduct and character amongst yourselves. Why? Or rather, what is it? But because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God drives them out from before you. And what? And that he may fulfill the word which the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. See, folks, I mean, this is just unfolding in a very deadly manner for the Hebrew Israelite doctrine. They teach that Israel is some superior group. But man, God is just chopping away at this idea just in these two passages from Deuteronomy 7 and Deuteronomy 9. And man, there's a whole lot more in the old covenant, even the new covenant. There's a whole lot more that aligns with this idea. So not only do we see that they were outnumbered, they were physically inferior, they could not match the strength to fight these people. They also were not upright. It wasn't because they were righteous people. It was rather because of the wickedness of the lands that they went in. And God said what? He's fulfilling his promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So if you really want to see the positive reasons why they were being brought in, your answer is right here in Deuteronomy 9:5. The wickedness of the nations that were there already, and also what? That he may fulfill the word that he promised to their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's your two main reasons, your positive reasons that we see he's bringing them into the land. The negative reasons are what? Not because of your righteousness, not because of your uprightness of heart, not because of your strength and size, not because of your number. Notice it had nothing to do with something about Israel. It had everything to do with things outside of them. They were God's agent to bring forth his promise to the fathers. They were a vessel through which he brought forth the Messiah to promise or to bring the blessings to the world of forgiveness of sins for all. I mentioned earlier Acts 3:25 and 26. Go read that. That's exactly what it talks about. Jesus being the fulfillment of the promise to Abraham, and that to Israel first he would help, or he would turn every one of them away from their sins. So let's look at a few more verses here in Deuteronomy 9, and we'll wrap this up. It says in verse 6, therefore understand that the Lord your God is not giving you this land to possess because of your righteousness. Why? For you are a stiff-necked people. That's not a good compliment. That's not really praising the wonderfulness and superiority of Israel there. Why? Because it had nothing to do with Israel. God's saying this has nothing to do with you. On the contrary, if it was about you, you wouldn't be in this land at all. If it was about you, you would be punished. Matter of fact, if you look throughout the Old Testament, God punished Israel several times, but he always left a remnant. Do you know why he left a remnant? Because he had a promise to keep to their fathers. That's why once the promise was fulfilled in the first century, you see Israel just 40 years later being stomped out altogether. That was the end of their existence for good as a nation, as a physical nation. They would never have a kingdom on earth again. So we see in Deuteronomy 9, verse 6, that God calls them a stiff-necked people. So much for superiority. Verse 7, remember, do not forget how you provoked the Lord your God to wrath in the wilderness. That's something superior people do in the sight of God. They provoke him to wrath. From the day that you departed from the land of Egypt, look at that, from the day that you departed from the land of Egypt until you came to this place, 40 years, you have been rebellious against the Lord. Man, it's like almost as if God was trying to say, you aren't good people. You aren't a good people. You have a lot of problems. But I'm giving you this land because I got some other things I need to take care of, and you are going to be my tool to do that. And so it says in verse 8, also in Horeb, you provoked the Lord to wrath, so that the Lord was angry enough with you to have you destroyed. And we see down there that was concerning the golden calf. Then we come down here and you continue reading all the way down here through chapter 9. And you come to, excuse me, here's where God told Moses at Sinai, I've seen this people. They are a stiff-necked people. Then look at down in Deuteronomy 9 and verse 24. Moses tells Israel, you have been rebellious against the Lord from the day that I knew you. Man, so much for, God and Moses himself even referred to Israel. He gave them the general, he assigned them with the general title of what? You are a rebellious people. Are there individuals among Israel who were obedient? Yeah, sure, Moses. There's several, Joshua. There were several people amongst them that were faithful. It doesn't mean the entire, every last individual amongst them, but it does mean they were wicked enough to where God could refer to them as a group, on a group whole, on a collective sense. He could say, y'all are a bunch of wicked people. Y'all are wicked people. Y'all are a rebellious nation, a rebellious house. You've been rebellious from Egypt up till now, 40 years. I destroyed your parents because they were wicked and they rebelled against me. They were faithless and doubtful. And now I'm bringing you into this land. And it's not because y'all are just better. You're a small group. You're physically inferior to the people you're going to go in and take the land from. You're not outnumbered. You're not superior. You're not superior to them physically. Your righteousness is lacking because you're sure not righteous. You're wicked. You're not going in because you have uprightness of heart. That's not there either. Oh, but here's the reason why. These people in the land are just more wicked than you, and they've had more time to repent and all, and they've disregarded that, and so I'm punishing them on that basis. You I can't destroy yet because I still have promises to keep to your fathers. That's why I'm bringing you into this land. As I told your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, that you would get a land, and here it is. And so, folks, you look at this text here, Deuteronomy 9, Deuteronomy 7, there is just nothing at all to support the Hebrew Israelite doctrine that they are superior in some sense to the nations of the world, and that's why God chose them. No, they are a holy people. This is when God spoke to them through Moses. This is not saying in 21st century now that they are a holy people. No. It says you are a holy people. God chose them then above, a special treasure. He chose them above all the peoples. Remember, not chose them because they are above or they have some innate quality that makes them above. No, he chose them above all the others. He didn't choose the others, he chose them. He chose them above all the others. And it's not because of their number, of their character, of their size, their strength, nothing to do with that at all. It had to do everything with that the nations in the land were evil, were wicked, to where God had to drive them out in his justice and in his wrath. And also because God made a promise to the fathers of their nation. That is why God chose Israel. If you just simply look at the text here, it's clear. Israel was used for a purpose. They were never special. They were never God's end game. They were a means for God's end. The end was Christ, Romans 10, verse 4. He was the goal. He was the terminal point for God's promise to Abraham. I'm going to stick with y'all. I'm going to go all the way and hang with this nation all the way to the end. And the end was a reference to Jesus coming into the world and then God finally wiping out that nation of Israel in AD 70. That's when everything was done. Don't forget, in Genesis 28:15, God tells Jacob, after telling him about the land promise, the multitude, the nation promise, and what? The promise to bless the world through his seed. God says, I will be with you until I have done all that I have spoken to you. Once God brought forth that promised seed, he was done with Israel, and Israel was done. So thank you for watching. I appreciate the time that you took. I know it's a longer video. I was trying to get it to where I could get a screen recorder that didn't give me a time limit because I tend to talk long. But that's okay because I like being detailed. I like being accurate. So any comments, any questions you may have, feel free to put them in the comment section below, and I will definitely try to address those as I get to them. I don't want to promise that I will, but I'll do my best. So have a good day, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care.